One of the many reasons I love Reddit is because of all of the passive-aggressive queens and kings out there. So here are 4 stories of malicious compliance that made me giggle into my coffee this morning. Grab your drink and enjoy. The first story is by Drip Goofy, and it is called Don't Mess With My Waiters. Longtime lurker, first-time poster, on mobile, chew. Backstory: I started working at this banquet hall when I was about 14, and I worked my way up to head waiter / supervisor by the time I was 17. I quit last December. I have a lot of stories. Let me know if you guys want me to post more. As someone who has worked at that banquet hall for my fair share of time, my biggest pet peeve was when someone tries to tell me or my waiters how to do our job. We have a pretty old, fat Egyptian guy with a short temper and a thick accent as the manager. He had a tendency to always side with the customer. On to the actual story. I got a message from my boss and he tells me to get him 5 waiters, including myself, for tonight. We were serving about 130 people that night, so there wasn't all that much pressure. One thing about the job is you usually found out what the event was after you'd get there. It's never an issue because regardless, it's the same routine. No problem. I do my calls, get my waiters, and confirm with my boss. Everyone is there on time, and I was running a few minutes late, but it wasn't an issue. We usually start by hand wiping all the plates after they've been sent through the dishwasher to ensure that they're perfectly clean. The problem with this is that we have to wipe at least as many plates as the number of expected guests, so it takes a while and it's usually the first thing we do when we arrive. I arrive and I'm about to head into the kitchen to start wiping the plates when my boss calls my name and beckons me over. Now, I have no issue with people coming in to make sure everything goes perfectly. I get it, it's your kid's wedding day and you want to make sure it's perfect. I can understand that. But this wasn't even a wedding. It was for a 16-year-old girl's birthday party. To be honest, I was actually pretty happy that it was that, because that would mean that they would be playing more modern music, which is always a plus, instead of old, overplayed hit singles from the 2000s. The person that was planning the birthday party was the girl's best friend. We'll call her AH, short for butthole. She wanted to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb and make sure it was all perfect. This included the waitstaff. She was constantly pestering the waitstaff about petty things such as the way jugs of water should be placed on the table or the placement of the forks and the knives, and my waiters would get easily annoyed and pass her off to me. This happened so often that we ended up getting into an argument, and she was ranting about how she was paying hard-earned money when we gave her a fat 20% discount. I was trying to get the message across that we know what we are doing and wanted her to piss off, but she escalated it and started yelling and becoming aggressive. She then went and complained to my boss, who in an attempt to keep his customer happy pulled me into the office with her and started grilling me on "the customer is always right" and basically telling me I was to submit my soul to her if she asked for it. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. My boss says, you guys are to do everything exactly as she tells you that she wants it. She's the customer and the goal is to ensure that the customer is satisfied. If you are unsure about how she wants something done, just ask her. This will be the last time I get a complaint about this. Am I understood? And I will have no more rudeness. Do your jobs professionally. At first I was a bit bummed, but not surprised. He almost always takes the customer's side regardless of the situation. But then an idea hit me like a fire truck. I smiled politely and turned to my boss smiling, and in the most obvious fake customer service voice, almost bordering on sarcasm, I turned to my boss and said, "Yes, sir, I'm very sorry about that. I promise it will never happen again." Then I turned to AH, and she's smirking at me, thinking she's already won. "I'm so sorry. My staff and I will make sure everything is up to your standards." They're both staring at me for a minute. My boss knows me pretty well, and he knows that I'm a butthole if you're a butthole, and I think he knew I was gonna pull something, but for whatever reason, he let it slide and didn't say a thing about it. Or maybe he didn't notice. My boss turns and tells me to get back in the kitchen, and then returns to apologizing to AH like a Canadian. I get back to the kitchen and round up my staff for a quick brief. I told them that if they were unsure of the littlest thing, no matter how small, could even be how your hair was looking or which side of the plate you want to put the spoon on, that they were to ask AH and ask her to come and demonstrate. My staff already knew I was up to something, and they loved it when I did this sort of stuff, so they were all in. Naturally, within 20 minutes of the meeting, my boss runs into the kitchen asking me, what did I do? I turned to him in faked innocence, and he points out to the hallway, and that's why I saw this screaming before I heard it. I was by the chef, and the vent hoods were running. You guys don't understand. It took every fiber of my being to hold me back from exploding into a laughing mass. As I was watching, AH was red-faced and screaming as 3 of my 5 waiters were lined up like middle schoolers, waiting to ask a stupid question, each one of them visibly trying to restrain themselves from grinning ear to ear. They had planned this without me telling them to. They would follow her around, occasionally switching out with another waiter to get some actual work done too. Wherever she went, they followed, and when she would address them, they would all raise their hands like middle schoolers, and she would pick on them to ask a question, a very ridiculously stupid question. My boss pulled me into his office with her. My boss asked, "What are the waiters doing? They're being very disturbing?" My boss begins to settle in for a display of grilling me in another attempt to cheer up AH, but I was having none of it, so I interrupted him. Keep in mind that AH was sitting right across from me in his office and smirking and sneering as she knew I was about to get scolded. So I said, "Sir, you told me to do everything exactly as she wanted. And if we were unsure, we were to ask, isn't that what you said? You told us to be professionals, we were just being extra polite." I pulled the best poker face I could manage and waited for a reaction. My boss stared at me for a second, defeated, and turned to her and said, "I told him what you told me." And before he could finish, she gathers her stuff and storms out of the office. I turned to my boss and grinned wide, and he shook his head and told me to get back to work and cut the BS. And then he chuckled for a second before coughing and getting up to go deal with AH's fury. I went back to my waiters and told them to cut the crap. And meanwhile, we all laughed and walked out the doors, only to see that she was in earshot of the loud laughing. Needless to say, she let us do our jobs. Right before my boss left that night, he turned to me and said, "You're a smart little butthole." He laughed a little, said goodbye, and left. I mean, can you be mad at the guy? He was doing his job to a T. Next is a short and sweet story by user AE Foxbird called "How to Use a Strict Teacher's Two-Strike Rule to Ace a Test." This didn't happen to me, but to my dad, and it's one of my favorite stories he tells. Some years ago, by which I mean 2 or so decades, roughly, my dad was at a several-day course to earn some additional qualifications for his job. On the final day, there was going to be a multiple-choice test to actually pass the seminar. On test day, everyone got settled into place, and the teacher announced that he would not go easy on cheaters. You had 1 strike to be caught trying to copy off someone else or use a cheat sheet. But if you were caught a second time, you would be immediately thrown out and your score made invalid. Now, this teacher was very old school strict, and he was treating grown working people like unruly school children, and my dad did not like that very much. So my dad proceeds to take the test, and it goes pretty well. When he's through with the questions, there is just one left where he's not sure he's got it right. And he has a free strike after all. So my dad yells out into the class. He just calls out, "What's the answer to question 14? Some complete bro elsewhere in the room yells the answer back. My dad fills in the sheet, gets up, walks to the teacher's desk, trying not to trip on the teacher's jaw as it lies on the floor, and hands in his test, leaving the room. To the teacher's credit, he approached my dad afterwards with some begrudging respect. Now, I don't know if he changed his policy afterwards, or the tone in which he conveyed it. That's actually incredibly smart. The teacher gave OP's dad a free pass for an answer, and OP's dad used it to the best of his advantage. That's what you get for treating grown adults like children. Adults have learned to read the fine line. Last but not least, my favorite story about how OP became Pepsi-Man. The story was written by user TORCNM. So I go to a smallish high school, like 600 kids. I did some nerdy stuff. Band, theater, speech, and I swam too. Was well known and relatively liked. Anyways, in my senior year, I would rock up to school late to first hour English, Pepsi in hand. Teacher starts to notice and gives me detentions for it, and I still do it. This continues for a few weeks until the gas station I bought my Pepsis from was having a sale. Apparently, the now ex-manager had ordered way too much Pepsi, like a whole pallet's worth. It was taking up so much space in his tiny store that the owner put it on sale for $3 for a 24-pack. I would have been a fool not to buy them. I rock up to school carrying 3 24-packs. Whilst avoiding looks from our school cop and hall monitor, I unloaded those babies in my locker. Pepsi time. I grabbed handfuls of these beautiful blue boys and put them in my backpack. Again, I rock up to class late. My friend mentions being thirsty. Pepsi time. I grab one out of my backpack and roll it over to him. As he looks at me with confusion, I say, "Drink, my child." People hear me say this. People see the Pepsi. People see how much I have. I give people the Pepsi. I am christened as the god of Pepsi. This happens several times over the next 2 weeks, me restocking the Pepsi supply at the end of each week. Eventually, the teacher starts to amp up the detentions to 2 and 3 every time I'm late. Or so she said. I believe it was because of all the noise from opening cans. One day, she just tells me to go to the assistant principal's office. The children are left without their Pepsi. They are sad. The assistant principal basically tells me that the cans are distracting to the class and that I can't bring them in anymore. Sad emote. How will the children get their Pepsi? Such a fool. They will get their Pepsi anyways. My place of work sells Pepsi for like $1, including the employee discount. When I learn of this, I immediately buy about 6 of them. The next day, I leave all of my books at home, no need for them. It's Pepsi time. I rock up to school late again, Pepsi in backpack and solo cups in my hands. The teacher smiles her biggest smile and says good morning. She obviously knows about the Pepsi. Fool. I keep eye contact and bring out the 2-liter bottle. Her expression turns. I open one, and the crisp sound of fresh Pepsi floods my ears. The other kids cheer. The teacher tries to send me back to the assistant principal's office, but I simply say, "It's not a can." She still calls him down, and I get 3 days suspension in school for disobeying the rules or whatever. I don't care. My children have been given the water of life. Aftermath. I found out from some friends at lunch that they've posted pictures of my face all over Pepsi-Man's body. I am now Pepsi-Man in the eyes of the school. I still hand out Pepsi to everyone who asks for it. I am Pepsi-Man. And here's a recent edit. Sweet victory. Again, I rocked up late to school, Pepsi in hand. My children have their Pepsi. The teacher calls the assistant principal and I'm sent down. I rock up to his office and like the Kendall Jenner, I offer him a peace Pepsi. He declines, but instead says that I may bring the Pepsi to the children before school without a problem. Joyous days. My children have their Pepsi and I am still the Pepsi Man. I don't know why, but I feel like cheering. What a god. I wish we had such an icon in my high school. The teacher should really thank him for giving everybody caffeine because everybody must have been really focused in that school.